So this is regarding the Father Damian Zablocki allegations, and I wanted to start with sort of an overview of the feedback I've received so far. The first thing I wanted to address was a statement made in a comment on Facebook on the Facebook Live version of this video, saying that my argument, or let's say our argument, because we have witness testimony, relies merely on hearsay. There's a problem with that. I think every source I've looked at defines hearsay as a rumor, right, as something not admissible, for instance, in a legal context to court, because it's secondhand or it's not under oath, right? It's outside of the scenario. So, like, Susan's mother's sister-in-law, her aunt heard that Sally heard from Joe the butcher that Steve stole a candy bar from the grocery store. So that would be hearsay or rumor, right? Let's just do this. I think this would make it easy. I'm going to share my screen, and we're just going to, we're just going to do something here. So, definition of hearsay. All right, so let's see, we got WEX, U.S. law. Hearsay is an out-of-court statement that is offered to prove the truth of something, blah, blah, blah. Hearsay in a legal forum, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so is an out-of-court statement which is being offered in court for the truth of what was asserted. So the AI overview, hearsay is an out-of-court, blah, 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 is generally unadmissible because the original government is not present for cross-examination. So this is something that someone else said, right, that we're alluding to. And this person's not present, right? We could also say that it's something heard secondhand, third hand, fourth hand, fifth hand, etc. Let's see. What else? Dictionary, Oxford Languages. Information received from other people that one cannot adequately substantiate. Rumor. All right. Okay. So let's do this. What is an antonym for hearsay? Okay. See if we got anything. Oh, thesaurus.com. We got 31 words. All right. So this is synonyms. So evidence, proof, reality, testimony. Okay, so there's testimony. Okay, what is testimony? Proof. Okay, so let's do this. Define testimony, or like direct testimony. There we go. Let's see what happens. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this is legal stuff. Well, let's look at the summary. Okay, so this would be firsthand, right? So the witness shares personal knowledge describing events, identifying exhibits, like photos or documents. So we have actually a photo commentary, right, in one of our testimonies, and providing details from their perspective. All right. So for instance, I saw the defendant run the red light. Okay. Okay. All right. So let's stop sharing. Boom. All right. So hearsay, rumor versus testimony. Testimony. So this is firsthand account, right? And in the case that we're overviewing right now, which is merely one case out of many, I'm sure, ongoing in the United States, This just happens to be the local case that I'm familiar with, right? But the picture is bigger than this. We have signed witness testimony. So we have signed firsthand accounts. So that would not be hearsay. Hearsay would be, again, I heard from so and so that Johnny hit Sally, but Sally was the one who told us after she, drank 3 margaritas. Anyway, like that sort of thing. That would be hearsay or rumor. I looked up, I did some more research. Obviously, I kind of wanted to do it live there just for the exercise, but from Broman's Law, basically they say that testimony consists of direct statements given under oath by a witness with personal knowledge. Whereas Merriam-Webster basically says that evidence is not based on a witness's personal knowledge, but on another's statement. So again, when we look at the testimony that we've provided, that we're reporting, right? So we've gathered testimony, and now I am releasing it. That testimony is from the individuals, right? Firsthand accounts, and then they signed it, they inked it, they put their name on it. So firsthand account. Okay. Hopefully that's been clarified. Hearsay is not the same as direct testimony. Direct testimony is not the same as hearsay. Hearsay, for instance, in a court of law would not be admissible. Direct testimony is admissible in a court of law. Here we have signed witness testimonies. They've written it, they've inked it. All right, moving on from that. I got some more feedback, good feedback, I'd say, from some priests. I'm not going to name them, and I'm only going to generally give the messages they sent me. But one priest said, basically, he doesn't know of any homosexual activity by a priest in the archdiocese. Said he's heard third or fourth hand about a priest who thankfully is no longer in active ministry. So I think that's a good thing. And I guess we have to qualify, the scenario in the US by saying, no, not every diocesan priest knows exactly at any given moment which other priests are engaged in homosexual activity. And that is probably a good thing if they're focused on their ministry and on their job and taking care of those in their parish. That means they're busy doing good things. One thing he mentioned I disagreed with was that we don't really have to, we can't change what's in the past. So really, we just have to basically be diligent now, right? But my disagreement is that, well, we can address what happened in the past by sanctioning priests that entered seminary with evil intent, right? Meaning that they knew they were homosexuals. They knew they were actively homosexual, and they still attempted to enter seminary and somehow got in. And then, of course, situations where the bishop knows that they are homosexual and selects them. And I think that is the case more often than not when a homosexual makes it into a diocesan formation program. They've been selected. And that will be substantiated with further remarks. Another priest mentioned that he had some good feedback and, said basically it's hard to know which priests are doing it, short of like gaydar, right? Like just this intuition, which he says you can't really act on, which to some extent is true. He does mention that, of course, you can watch these people. You can keep an eye on them. The other thing, though, is, so with the sodomite mafia, he mentions this is true. They're going to take care of their own, right? The Lavender Mafia, they're going to take care of their own. They're going to look out for each other, and for one reason or another. So they're not necessarily going to share all of the time what they're doing with priests who aren't homosexual. So got to keep it on the DL, right? Another priest, said basically we need divine intervention at this point. He said it's a depressing but necessary topic of discussion. So that's heartening, because there is a lot of negativity in this situation, and that's to be expected. And I understand that, and I'm not surprised by that at all. But we do have to acknowledge that the global issue in the priesthood is something that has been ongoing for a very long time in the church, and that it's not stopping, right? Just because, again, the archdiocese settles a bankruptcy. I mean, immediately, right? The Father Corey Laverne story comes out. It's almost like if it weren't so horrendous, we could almost look at ourselves and maybe be slightly amused that we've been hoodwinked for so long, But we have to fight for the purification of the clergy. That's what we have to do. And it's going to be difficult in situations where you have a particular attachment to somebody. Like this particular situation is local, so it's going to cause a lot of ripples. There's going to be a lot of upset people. There's going to be a lot of pushback. But we can stick our heads in the sand and cry uncle, or we can do what needs to be done. And as the laity, we have a job to protect society. And so when clergy become a menace to society, well, that's where we step in. And look, man, stats aren't good for homosexuals and pedophiles. Usually that's where they come from. The pedophiles come from the homosexuals. So look, with the hearsay accusation, again, like, you have to realize that the people who came forward at great risk to themselves and their reputations. They wrote down their experiences. They signed their names to those testimonies, and they were willing, at least the testimonies that I have to present to you, and I'm sure there are other people out there right now, perhaps even listening, who have stories who haven't come forward, and I have something to say about that. But they take on a great risk. They were victims to some extent, greater or lesser, and they came forward through that pain because they realized that this man shouldn't be left at large to hurt other people. And that's, at the end of the day, unfortunately, the victim incurs a duty. So those of you who haven't said anything, but something's happened to you, or you've experienced something that was unsavory, unfortunately, it's not your fault that it happened to you, but you do have a duty to come forward for the protection of your brothers and sisters in the body of Christ. Otherwise, your children and their children will suffer the consequences. So remember the risk. So obviously, I'm taking a risk to my reputation, to all sorts of things, my business, it's not you would say it wouldn't be the smartest, quote unquote, business decision from a perspective of mere monetary gain for me to be going after the archdiocese when I make a lot of sacred furnishings for a living. But this has to be done, And quite frankly, I mean, if it would mean that I would have to make a bunch of, 60s themed or just modern, streamlined, essentially ugly, minimalist furniture, I mean, I don't want to do that anyway. But so we need a revival in the church in its totality, in the sense of its dedication to itself, to its teachings, to its truths. So we can't have the Lavender Mafia running the thing. That's just not going to work for me. Sorry, I don't have to put up with it. You don't have to put up with it. Nobody has to put up with it. So I'm not going to put up with it, okay? We'll just start there. I'm not going to put up with it. And the people who have signed these testimonies, they're not going to put up with it. So my challenge to those of you who, have heard these testimonies dismissed as hearsay is to actually read them. Now I know of, let's see, 3 or 4 people who are involved with the testimonies, who have submitted testimony, who have been disparaged by Father Damian. So I wouldn't be surprised if all of the people who have submitted testimony haven't been disparaged by him, right? He seems like he's probably trying to cover his bases. So keep that in mind too. Your homework is to read the testimonies. That's your homework today. Don't give me homework, Ross. Whatever. Don't be retarded. Think for yourself. Let's go over the Tace Modo report. I'm going to walk you through that because, again, you need to read the testimonies. We all need you to read the testimonies. You need to understand what's at stake. But the Tace Modo report is by Father Kenneth Allen, who has a lot of intimate experience with all of these very bizarre goings on with Father Damian. And I have it here. Let's see. I want to share my entire screen. Can I do that? They won't let me do that. I want to share a window. Can I open this and share this? It's kind of a weird... Wait, it was just open. No. Just make it smaller. There we go. Shrink it. No, now it's bigger. Sorry, guys. I'm new to the streaming software. Oh, it just disappeared again. Okay, hold on. Nope, that's my calendar. All right. Well, look, give me a sec. I'm going to open it somewhere else. Let's do this. Okay. So, and you can comment on the video and I'll address whatever next video. I'm doing a series because it seems that people need to understand the context, the narrative context of all these documents and why they were published. Like, why is there a public filial correction? Why was there, following a private filial correction? There was a meeting before that with the Archbishop and the Vicar General. There was a meeting before that with the Vicar General. So there's many events that occurred that led up to us releasing that public filial correction. And I do have new testimony to submit to the new bishop, but I don't have permission to release that to you yet, but hopefully I will get it. Let's see, I'm going to find this report here in my email, and then I'll be able to share it to the screen. There it is. Ba, 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 ba. Wonderful. Okay, here we go. I'm going to share it. Share screen. Yep, that's what we want to share. Okay, here you go. I'm going to open it so I can see it. Okay. So it's called Tace Modo, Just Be Quiet, Personal Report on Coordinated Institutional Cover-Up and Corruption of Justice, prepared by Father Kenneth Allen, based on direct observation of diocesan operations and knowledge of the events described herein. Now, in case anybody wants to point this out, Father Ken, he emailed this to me, and his signature's not on it, so you'll just have to ask him if it's legit. So introduction and context. Tace Modo, or just be quiet. This phrase, with its dismissive and silencing tone, has taken on devastating significance in light of recent events that reveal not merely individual failures of leadership, but a seemingly coordinated conspiracy involving church officials, civil authorities, and legal counsel to suppress evidence of serious criminal activity involving minors. The very title of this report reflects the institutional mentality that has enabled such corruption. When confronted with uncomfortable truths, the response is not investigation or justice, but a demand for silence. The author of this report has served within the diocese for 5 decades, 2 as a priest, and has had direct access to information regarding the events described herein through pastoral duties, diocesan communications, and confidential discussions with affected parties. Excuse me. What emerges from this evidence is a picture of systematic corruption that implicates not only church leadership, but civil authorities who have abdicated their duty to protect children in favor of institutional accommodation. The Foundation Initial Incidents and Institutional Response, the Teen Sexting Ring Discovery 2022. The sequence of events that would ultimately expose the depth of institutional corruption began with the discovery of a teen sexting ring operating within parish circles. When confronted with credible reports of this criminal activity, diocesan officials produced an internal report that concluded no reporting to civil authorities was required because the incidents were hearsay. This hearsay justification, interesting, this word popping up again, I'll just say as a side note, hearsay. If you just label something hearsay, it just goes away, right? This hearsay justification reveals a fundamental misunderstanding or deliberate misapplication of both legal and canonical reporting requirements. The logic employed by diocesan officials suggests that unless misconduct is witnessed firsthand by the reporting party, it can be dismissed as hearsay and therefore not subject to mandatory reporting obligations. This interpretation is not only legally incorrect, but creates a virtually insurmountable barrier to reporting any form of abuse or exploitation. The Easter Party Incident 2022. The situation escalated dramatically during an Easter celebration held on church property in 2022. And I'll just stop and say, I'll insert some context here. This is at the, what was it called? The North Shore Pastoral Center, whatever. It was where Catholic Charities used to have their offices. It's where Our Lady of Mount Carmel is, right? So this was an Our Lady of Mount Carmel Easter vigil. And then after that, they had this party. Okay, back to it. Following the conclusion of Lent and after the lengthy Easter vigil, parents attending the event were consuming alcohol while teenagers were provided with opportunities for sexual activity in unsupervised areas of the church facility. The combination of parental alcohol consumption and inadequate supervision of minors created conditions that facilitated inappropriate sexual activity on consecrated ground. The Internal Investigation Findings 2023, a critical piece of evidence that further exposes the depth of institutional corruption, is found in the church's own internal report from 2023. This internal investigation concluded that the incident in question took place in a private home, not on church property, as had been previously suggested or assumed. So this was in an email from a diocesan representative to Father Ken that stated that referred to this event as having happened in a private home, which it did not. It happened on church property. Okay, back to the text. This conclusion is significant for multiple reasons, each of which compounds the gravity of the institutional failures documented throughout this case. The internal report's conclusion that the incident occurred in a private home rather than on church property significantly reduces the church's direct liability for the incident itself. However, this liability-reducing conclusion makes the church's subsequent failure to report to DCFS even more inexplicable and legally problematic. Perhaps even more significant than the location determination is the revelation that no report was made to the Department of Child and Family Services, despite this being the appropriate agency for incidents occurring in private homes. This failure represents a fundamental breach of legal obligation that compounds all of the other violations documented in this case. Okay, now look, you need to read the most recent article about Father Corey Laverne, right? Go see the conversation between the mother and the child and the bishop. Just look, I want you to see if there are any parallels in the way that this incident is being treated with how the Father Corey Laverne incident is being treated. All right, the reporting retraction cycle. So the 2023 mandatory report, the incidents that occurred during the Easter celebration and the broader pattern of misconduct associated with the teen sexting ring resulted in a mandatory report filed in 2023. This was Father Ken. Father Ken filed this report. This report represented the fulfillment of both legal and moral obligations by priests who recognized the gravity of the situation, the need for proper investigation by trained authorities. Secret retraction. However, what the mandatory reporter did not know at the time was that during the sheriff's investigation of his report, the family had retracted their statements, fundamentally altering the nature of their allegations. I want to make a note here. I'm going to make an important note here. Okay? I have spoken with the father of the daughter who was assaulted. Okay? And she told him that the touch that she received was not wanted. Okay? The father of this girl, again, this occurred at Our Lady of Mount Carmel after the Easter Vigil. The father of this girl conveyed this to the sheriff's deputy. But he said, I couldn't be sure whether it was wanted or not, right? I cannot be certain. But that is what she told him, that it was not wanted. I have seen that part of the sheriff's report, and it's very odd the way that that is stated. The reporting deputy wrote that the touch may not have been unwanted. Now, that's different from the victim saying that it was not wanted and the father saying that he couldn't be certain, right? So absolute certainty can't be had. That's a bit different. So saying on the one hand, and this is my perspective, saying on the one hand, the touch may not have been unwanted in the report is different from the victim reporting that it was unwanted, but the father not having absolute certainty. It's just weird. That's all I'm going to say. Just weird. Okay. Back to the document by Father Ken Allen. All right. Fundamentally altering the nature of their allegations. The retraction occurred without the knowledge of the mandatory reporter, who continued to believe that his report had been filed in good faith based on accurate information provided by the family. The mandatory reporter's conclusion that the family had been subjected to both institutional and peer pressure represents a sophisticated understanding of the dynamics that often surround abuse allegations within religious communities. Such pressure can take many forms, from subtle social ostracism to explicit threats of exclusion from the faith community. The 2025 reassertion. In 2025, the same family came forward again, stating that they were still seeking justice for the incidents that had occurred years earlier. This renewed assertion of their grievance demonstrated remarkable courage and suggested that their concerns had never been adequately addressed, or that new circumstances had compelled them to seek justice once more. It was only at this point that the mandatory reporter, again, this is Father Ken Allen, acquired a copy of the initial 2023 report from the sheriff's investigation. Upon reviewing this document, he made the shocking discovery that the family had retracted their statements during the 2023 investigation. This is what I just mentioned. Okay, side note, this is what I just mentioned. The language in the report is odd. And I was texting with the father just yesterday, or it may have even been this morning. And things just don't quite add up there. A fact that had been kept from him for 2 years. Based on his knowledge of the family, the circumstances surrounding the original incidents, and his understanding of institutional pressure tactics, he concluded that the 2023 report was fake in some way, which it seems he was right about, because that language just doesn't accurately reflect the knowledge obtained from the victim. Not necessarily in the sense that the original incidents had not occurred, but in the sense that the family's retraction did not reflect their true beliefs or experiences. Which is true, according to the father that I was communicating with via text this morning, or I think it was this morning. Okay. Institutional retaliation and cover-up, character assassination campaign. The institutional response to the mandatory reporter's actions reveals the true character of the corruption at work. When interviewed about the situation, the chaplaincy priest, this is Father Damian Zablocki. Father Damian Zablocki is the chaplaincy priest. The chaplaincy priest made disparaging comments about the mandatory reporter, characterizing him as a gossip who had it out for him. Okay, this is actually like had it out for him is like actually in the sheriff's report. You can go look at it. I'll probably pull it up in another video. Like, why is that in the report? Why is there some kind of like characterization of someone who makes a mandatory report as someone who has it out for the person that should have followed through on the report? Now there's this complicated thing where, you know, it seems Father Damien talked to the police department and he talked to the DA. But the mandatory report, the sheriff's report, was done by Father Kenneth Allen. So why is this in the report? But again, you can go, it's public records. You can go pull that report. You can look at it. I'm going to show it to you in a later video. These comments represent a low-minded attempt to discredit a fellow priest who had fulfilled his legal and moral obligations by reporting credible concerns about child safety, relayed to him by angry parents demanding report numbers and given moral weight by the number of parishioners who knew of the situation and agreed with the parents' assessment. Archbishop's response and legal maneuvering. When the family's 2023 retraction became known to church officials, the Archbishop's response was telling. Rather than expressing concern about the circumstances that might have led to such a retraction, or initiating an independent canonical investigation to determine the truth of the matter, the Archbishop appears to have viewed the retraction as a convenient resolution that absolved the Church of further responsibility. The Archbishop's decision to engage a canon lawyer to investigate reveals both the seriousness with which church officials viewed the potential threat and their determination to use legal expertise to avoid accountability rather than pursue justice. The involvement of canonical legal counsel at this stage suggests that church officials were fully aware of the gravity of their canonical violations and the potential consequences of a thorough investigation. Deliberate misrepresentation of mandatory reporter. A recent canonical investigation displayed the Archdiocese's deliberate misrepresentation of the mandatory reporter's assessment of the 2023 report. So I'm actually a firsthand witness to this. I'm a firsthand witness to this because I was there meeting with the Archbishop. And Father Pat Williams, the Vicar General, comes out and says, like, oh, well, Father Ken said the report was bogus. Okay. It's my dog's going crazy. Okay. Let's go back to it. Share. All right. When addressing the strange handling of the sex abuse case, archdiocesan officials claimed that it did not matter because the mandatory reporter said it was a fake report. Okay, so who's the mandatory reporter? Again, this is Father Kenneth Allen. Archdiocesan officials claimed that it did not matter because the mandatory reporter said it was a fake report. I was there. I was in the room when that suggestion was made. This characterization represents a profound distortion of the mandatory reporter's actual assessment. When the mandatory reporter concluded that the 2023 report was fake in some way, he was not suggesting that the original allegations were false or that the incidents had not occurred. Rather, he was expressing his professional judgment that the family's retraction was not genuine, that it resulted from institutional and peer pressure rather than a genuine change in their beliefs about what had happened. Now, since this particular report by Father Kenneth Allen, I, again, communicated with the father who spoke with the sheriff's deputy. And so was there really a retraction, I guess is the question now. If you were to look at the sheriff's report, based on how it's written, you could say, oh, that's a retraction because it says that the touch may not have been unwanted. But if that's not what the father intended to have in the report, because what he intended to relay was that his daughter told him that it was unwanted, something's a little weird, right? So just, why is it so bizarre? Ask yourself that. Why is the situation so bizarre? Okay, back to it. I got to share the screen. You can tell I'm not a YouTuber or anything like that. Boom. Blah, blah, blah. Share screen. Okay, back to it. This characterization represents a profound distortion of the mandatory reporter's actual assessment. Blah, blah, blah. Rather, he was expressing his professional judgment that the family's retraction was not genuine. He was also expressing that something strange had transpired and needed investigation. Right, okay, yes, bizarre. Something strange had transpired and needed investigation. I agree with that. Civil authority complicity. Sheriff's investigation failures. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire sequence is the apparent cooperation of civil authorities, specifically the sheriff and district attorney in suppressing the investigation. The sheriff's handling of the family's 2023 retraction raises serious questions about the adequacy of the investigative process and the potential for institutional influence. The fact that the family's retraction was accepted without apparent follow-up investigation suggests either gross incompetence or deliberate complicity in the cover-up. Professional investigators should recognize that retractions of abuse allegations often result from pressure and intimidation rather than genuine changes of heart. The failure to investigate the circumstances surrounding the retraction represents a fundamental breach of investigative standards. And of course, again, new context. Like, there's a bigger problem because the sheriff's report doesn't reflect the will of the testimony of doesn't reflect the testimony of the father, according to the father. Again, this was between two minors. It happened on Father Damian's watch after an Easter vigil, wee hours of the morning, inside of the building where Our Lady of Mount Carmel Chapel is and operates. District attorney cooperation. The district attorney's apparent cooperation in this suppression represents an even more serious breach of public duty as the chief law enforcement officer responsible for prosecuting crimes against children. The DA's decision to abandon the investigation in the face of institutional pressure constitutes a profound dereliction of duty that leaves the entire community vulnerable to further exploitation. This cooperation between church and civil authorities creates a climate of impunity that extends far beyond any single case. When law enforcement officials demonstrate their willingness to subordinate justice to institutional convenience, they effectively signal that certain classes of criminals, particularly those with institutional protection, are above the law. That has never worked well for the church. Biggest understatement ever. Look, why do we still have sex abuse crises in the church? We have completely corrupt and incompetent civil government, right? Why haven't we just investigated every single diocese ruthlessly? I mean, I'd be totally for that because they don't work for the church. They seem to just work for a select cadre of individuals who have particular predilections. Moving on. Comprehensive canonical analysis. The events described in this report constitute multiple grave violations of canonical law that, under the church's own legal framework, could warrant the most serious penalties available under church law. The Archbishop's role in orchestrating this cover-up violates numerous canons and represents an abuse of ecclesiastical power that the law addresses through various penalty structures. Violation of Vos Estis Lux Mundi. The Archbishop's failure to ensure proper investigation of the allegations reported in 2023, despite knowledge of the family's retraction and the suspicious circumstances surrounding it, constitutes a clear violation of Article 1, Paragraph 1b, which criminalizes actions or omissions intended to interfere with or avoid investigations of sexual delicts. The tolerance for and apparent encouragement of the chaplaincy priest's character assassination of the mandatory reporter constitutes a clear act of retaliation that violates explicit canonical prohibitions in Article 4, Paragraph 2. I just want to make clear that nobody cares about canon law. It's as if it only exists as a baton against the laity or to protect the hierarchy from allegations by the laity. No, they don't care. At least from my perspective. That's my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. Abuse of ecclesiastical power, the use of church authority to suppress criminal investigations, intimidate witnesses, and corrupt civil authorities represents profound abuse of ecclesiastical power. Canon 1378, paragraph 1 provides that such abuses be punished according to the gravity of the act or the omission, not excluding deprivation of the power or office. Scandal, Canon 1369. The entire sequence of events has caused grave scandal to the faithful. No doubt. These people were essentially ostracized from Our Lady of Mount Carmel. The victims were ostracized. Not a good look. And undermine the church's moral authority in ways that will take generations to repair. Failure to report. We know about the failure to report. It's a little bit complicated, as I mentioned, but the official mandatory reporter was Father Kenneth Allen. When the father brought it to Father Ken Allen's attention after they started going to St. James, because once you bring something like this to a priest's attention, he has to report it by law. So that's what Father Ken did. The broader pattern of institutional corruption, systemic silencing mechanisms, the hearsay excuse, man, that hearsay excuse, tell you, for avoiding reporting requirements represents one form of this silencing mentality. By dismissing credible allegations As legally insufficient, officials avoid their obligation to ensure proper investigation. The pressure applied to the family to retract their statements represents another form. By making the cost of truth-telling too high, officials ensure that victims and their families choose silence over justice. Ever heard of that before? I think according to Father, we'll just call him Gene Gomulka. I don't know his canonical status or whatever. Let's just say, according to Gene Gomulka, the average age that someone reports being abused is like in the 50s, somewhere in the 50s. And then most of those abuse victims, or most abuse victims, never report being abused. So you have no idea how many people have been abused because they'll never say anything. And this might give us a clue as to why, right? The character assassination of the mandatory reporter represents yet another form by portraying legitimate reporting as personal malice. Remember, that was actually in the sheriff's report. Why on earth would there be a characterization of testimony in one way or another in a sheriff's report? It's just weird, man. Like, is that standard operating procedure? It doesn't seem like it should be. Officials discredit the messenger rather than addressing the message. The coordination with civil authorities to suppress investigation represents the ultimate expression of this mentality. When internal silencing mechanisms prove insufficient, external pressures apply to ensure that uncomfortable truths never see the light of day. The Tace Modo mentality. This pattern of silencing creates a climate of fear that extends throughout the diocesan structure. Clergy who might otherwise speak out about problematic behavior learn to remain silent rather than risk their own careers and reputations. Lay faithful who observe concerning conduct learn to keep their concerns to themselves rather than face potential exclusion from their faith communities. Okay, obviously some of us have come out, and we know we're going to be excluded from certain communities. It's cool. The mandatory reporter's experience serves as a cautionary tale for others who might consider reporting misconduct. Despite fulfilling his legal and moral obligations in good faith, he found himself subjected to character assassination, kept in the dark about crucial developments in the case, and ultimately portrayed as a troublemaker rather than a truth teller. Again, a priest is a mandatory reporter. That means by law, when someone comes to them with a sexual abuse allegation, they have to report it. Legally, they must. Recommendations for justice and reform. Immediate actions required. Canonical investigation. Civil investigation. Protection for reporters. Okay, you get the gist here. Systemic reforms needed. Reporting reform. Victim support. I mean, come on. Look, why do people have to sue the archdiocese to get any form of justice? Does that represent the Catholic Church? Does that behavior represent the Catholic Church? That instead of going out of its way to make amends with the people who've been harmed by priests, people have to sue the archdiocese. Or the archdiocese, comes out with a bankruptcy settlement. It's like, I mean, come on, whose money is that? So bankruptcy settlement, we will pay out. Great. Why did it ever come to that? Why did it ever come to that? Transparency requirements. Conclusion. Let's just read the conclusion. The phrase Tace Modo, just be quiet, represents everything that is wrong with the institutional response to child abuse within the church. It embodies a mentality that prioritizes institutional comfort over victim safety, reputation over justice, and silence over truth. The events documented in this report demonstrate the devastating consequences of this mentality. When church officials respond to credible allegations with pressure for silence rather than commitments to investigation, they create conditions that enable further abuse and corruption. When they characterize mandatory reporters as gossips and troublemakers, They discourage others from coming forward with legitimate concerns. When they coordinate with civil authorities to suppress investigations, they corrupt the very systems designed to protect children. The time for Tace Modo is over. The time for truth, justice, and accountability is at hand. The children who have been endangered by this conspiracy of silence deserve nothing less than complete vindication and the assurance that such corruption will never again be tolerated within the church or the broader community. The church's moral authority depends on its willingness to confront such corruption honestly and to implement meaningful reforms that prioritize child safety over institutional convenience. Only through such confrontation can the church hope to rebuild the trust that has been so grievously damaged and to fulfill its calling to be a beacon of justice and mercy in a broken world. This report is submitted in good faith and has been propagated with no legal counsel. Blah, blah, blah. Read that if you wish. It's all there. You go to the link I posted in the previous video. You can read all these documents yourself. And I'll post the link again, I'm sure, under this video. So, look, reform. Is that going to happen? I think you need to go and read the article that a friend of mine edited. It's called "The Parish You Hate Hates You," I think. I can confirm that in like 2 seconds. It's called "The Parish You Hate Hates You." That's right. "The Parish You Hate Hates You, The Path to New Plaques." It's by Christendom Quarterly on the Christendom Quarterly Substack. You should read that. I'll read you a little snippet. Hopefully it inspires you. Hopefully it inspires you. Only the laity can build Christendom. The hierarchy has nothing to do with it. They cannot run for office. They cannot support your run. They cannot fund you. They cannot speak for you. They are as powerless in the realm of nation building as the laity is in effecting change inside the hierarchy. That's a little taste for you. Hope you enjoy reading it. Please do read it. I think it will elucidate the situation we're discussing and what we're covering here. Your homework is again, if you haven't read the testimony, you got to read it. And if you have read it and you've dismissed it all, or you haven't read it and you've already dismissed it, we need to understand the difference between hearsay and direct testimony. That's an important distinction. But this problem is bigger than Father Damian in the Archdiocese of New Orleans. It's all over the place. Obviously, the Archdiocese settles bankruptcy. Guess what? Father Corey Laverne pops up. So what are we going to do about it? Again, we're caught between, on the one hand, corrupt, ineffective, incompetent, illegitimate government, corrupt, ineffective, incompetent, self-serving hierarchy. But we still have our duties as lay people to protect society, to protect each other, to protect the body of Christ in its day-to-day life and functions. And so we have to mount an attack against the Lavender Mafia. We have to overthrow it. Now, we can't go and depose people from their office. That's not what I'm saying. Can't go into the ecclesiastical sphere and depose people from their offices of priest and bishop. But we can do everything else. We can sanction them in every other way. And one of the primary ways we should do that is stop giving your diocese money until you haven't heard a peep about sexual abuse, not because people have been silenced, but because clergy have been pressured to oust the guys who are doing it, one, and two, stop selecting gays to come into, like, stop harvesting your fresh meat. Like, this is disgusting. Okay? It's disgusting. No one's amused. And in fact, I know that this sort of devious manipulation of the visible structure of the church probably comes from highly narcissistic and sociopathic personalities, such that they create such a huge problem that we then have to talk about it. Like, I have to talk about it, right? So it's almost like everything's about them, right? Not just everything's about me and like, I'm your superhero. You need me to have the Catholic Church. Like, you need me. Like, I'm clutching the sacraments, right? No, also when I do you harm and you notice, you're still thinking about me. Right? It's kind of, I don't know, super sinister. Anyway, that's all I've got for you tonight. Remember, Tace-Tace. It's a feature, not a bug. The Lavender Mafia, feature, not a bug. You know, it's interesting that you go and you look at the priestly fraternities that celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, or you look at the SSPX, and it's definitely a bug and not a feature. In diocesan seminaries, in the sort of mainstream Catholic hierarchy, it is a feature, not a bug. Again, last reminder, hearsay is not direct testimony. I'm happy to have helped those of you who are calling this testimony hearsay snatch defeat from the jaws of victory on that one. But God bless you all. We need to fight for the purity of Holy Mother Church. And that's our duty.